So, apropos of sharing my stories and my practice, so you sort of got the impression that I was fairly majorly bummed out by my travel fiasco. So how did I deal with it, practice-wise? Well, one thing is the obvious. When things would come up, I did use the focus in technique. I tend to use that when I'm upset, for the obvious reasons. Inevitably, the self returns, right? So there's two freedoms from the self. Well, there's a lot of freedoms from the self. It's many faceted, many ways actually. But the two that I like to mostly think about is, well, there's the experience of, quote, all rest, the non-arising of seeing, hearing, feeling. That actually happens much more frequently than people realize. One of the reasons that I give you these categories is so that you can start to notice that in fact you already are enlightened, at least microscopically. Because if you really pay close attention to the inner activation system, you'll see that there are all rest moments. And that's a relative no-self experience. It may not be clear and intense enough to cause a stream entry or a permanent change, but that is a relative moment of no-self. Now, if you happen to catch an intense arising of all three at the very beginning, and you completely quantumize it, and you catch the moment when all three vanish, and subjective space itself collapses to gone, then actually you will have a stream entry experience. And that's why Sasaki Roshi seems like he's very mean, because he describes how the self arises and passes, and then he makes damn sure that that's going to happen for you by saying things about you in public, you know. Oh yeah. There's no censoring and there's no mercy in that regard. Because he's just playing a numbers game, hoping that if he's got enough students here in America and makes people intensely self-conscious in front of all their friends enough times, someone's going to have what it takes to actually keep the practice going while that's happening, rather than get into the he said, she said, you know, F you, what have you. Anyway, so one form of freedom is, well, it doesn't arise, and you actually notice that. Another form of, this also is part of the koan system that he uses. So first, it's like, okay, when you see the flower, how do you become free from yourself? He wants see out without any see in, hear, and feeling at all. And he wants the see out, it's even itself, to be flow and go. But then the next question is going to be, or not the next, but another one somewhere down the line is, okay, good. It's wonderful. You achieve oneness with flower. Now, how do you separate from flower? Some of you are smiling because you actually had this go on. How do you separate from flower? Well, what does that mean? Does it mean make an object out of the flower? Well, not in the normal sense, because the goal is to not need to do that. But what it means is that the judging self does arise. However, it arises as an unfixated flow. It is completely equanimized, so that even though it is a self, as an arising, it is not a self as a thing. And so you've returned to yourself, but it's not really the self. So my languaging for this is, I'll tell you another story. I was privileged many years ago to live in the same vihara, the same Theravada Buddhist monastery as Ananda Maitreya. Ananda Maitreya was sort of the Sasaki Roshi of Theravada Buddhism in some ways. He was the grand old man. He was in his 90s, from Sri Lanka. And I remember seeing him as a much younger person in a BBC documentary called The Longest Journey. It's a documentary where they went around the world and interviewed spiritual leaders. And they interviewed him. And they said, well, could you summarize in a few sentences Buddhism? And he said, well, I can actually summarize it in a few words. No self, no problem. You might have heard that, okay? As far as I know, he's the person that originated that, okay? However, I have my little codicil, my version of that. So, no self, no problem, yeah. The non-arising of the self, no problem. But also, no self, no problem. Flow self, no problem. You follow? The self realizes, perhaps with a vengeance, perhaps firing on all three cylinders. See and hear and feel. But it's a flow self. It is a self. It can flow and fill the room with its doing. It's a room-sized personality, which is the diametric opposite of a room-sized ego. So, yeah, I sort of used focus in. A little bit to sort of process. But I also did something else, which was more in the line of nurture positive cognition. Entertaining a certain thought pattern. I think in psychology this is sometimes referred to as an explanatory mechanism. It's like, okay, doo-doo happened. Now, how do you think about it? You think about it's like, okay, this doo-doo always happens to me, or the world is, a pit of doo-doo, or why am I attracting this doo-doo to myself? Or, well, doo-doo happens and you have to accept it. Okay, am I right? In psychology, I think someone's saying yes, that there's the term explanatory style or explanatory mechanism. So it's like, how do you use talk space to deal with stuff? So what I use is pratitya samutpada. But it's only very minorly in talk space, actually. Not surprisingly, it's in image space. And I've noticed over the years that this sort of image-based cognitive reframing is coming easier and easier and easier, more and more naturally. And I think it has something to do with the whole sensitizing within the visual field that I described to you that is such a major element in my practice. So what I think is, I'm putting it into words, but as I say, I'm more see it than think it in words. But it's like, okay, well, yeah, it's in words too, though, it's true, now that I'm saying it. It's like, okay, I've been doing this stuff for 40 years, and I always made retreats on time because I'd leave a day early. And if there was a problem, then they'd get me there at least by the next day. And then I'm thinking, okay, well, there's really been a deterioration in the whole travel experience. There's the tension in the airport around the security, and are you going to make your flight? And then a lot of the flights get canceled. And so what's behind this? Okay, why has there been this deterioration? Well, there's probably many factors. And I'm not exactly an economist or very savvy in the political field. But what comes up to my mind is, well, this is at least partially a consequence of 9/11. And then I ask myself, what was behind 9/11? Well, lots of stuff. Part of it is U.S. policies in the Middle East. And what's behind that? Okay, now you all know I love Israel. Okay, I go there, whatever, but I don't talk about this stuff, okay, because it's not my area of expertise. I know what it means to know a subject really well. And one of the great things about knowing a subject really well, and by the way, the subject is sensory reality, okay? One of the great things, most people don't have something that they know really well, like as well as anyone in the world, okay? But I'll tell you, one of the great things about that is it leads to a huge sense of humility, because you know what it means to know something really well. And when I think about all the other things that I would like to pontificate on, like relative to knowing something really well, like what do I know about politics and economics and national policies and how stuff should be run by governments? You know, I know I can imagine what it would be like to really know that well, but like forget about it. I mean, not even remotely so. That could lead to a certain refreshing humility to realize that sort of militates against the tendency to just want to pontificate on every topic, you know, that comes up, like I see people in my health club doing, arguing about politics. Oh my God, after the election. It was bloody. Because if you were rooting for the other guy, you were hurting. And there aren't many people in Vermont that were rooting for the other guy. So I really felt sorry for the ones that were. I mean, really. But anyway, so let's not go there as far as, but the fact is that, and what's behind that? Well, the Holocaust, and what's behind that? Well, the way Germany was treated after World War I, which was very abusive. I mean, if you look at the history of, oh my God, senior moment. What was the
Third Reich?
No, what was the right after World War I,
Versailles.
Versailles, yeah. If you look at what happened at Versailles, if you look at the memoirs of some of those people, they knew that they had sown the seeds for another war. They just knew it, but they couldn't help doing it. They just couldn't stop it because they just wanted to beat up Germany, get even. And what's behind that? Well, all the shit in the 19th century, okay, in Europe, okay. You know what the French did when they invaded Germany, okay? Wasn't pretty, etc., etc., etc. And you get this sense that there's no one to blame and everyone's to blame. It just just behind, behind, the behind. And that means what? That the world sucks? That's not how I perceive it. Remember I said that N means this causality, but it also means connection. So the inconvenience that I go through when I have to travel now, that's my direct touching of all of the above. And it's part of the vastness of my true being. And that's that.